You have until 6 tomorrow morning, and then we remove it ourselves." That was Diane Caldwell, president of the Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on my gravel drive in kitten heels that kept sinking into the stones, telling me she intended to tear down a fence her association had no authority over. The fence ran along the west edge of my property in the high country outside Coldwater, Montana. 11 acres my wife Karen and I bought the year our daughter was born. Karen passed 4 winters back. The fence was the last thing she and I built, together with our own hands. What Diane did not know, what she never once thought to check in all the months she spent threatening me, was that I spent 31 years as a land surveyor, licensed in this state, and that every post in that fence sat exactly where the recorded plat said the boundary ran, because I was the one who walked the line and set the pins. She thought she was bullying a quiet old widower. She was arguing with the man who had the survey. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If a woman in a hot pink blazer told you she was going to bring a crew onto your land at dawn and demolish something your late wife helped build, and you knew, the way you know your own name, that she was dead wrong, what would you have done? Would you have shouted, called a lawyer that same hour? I did neither. I went inside, made coffee, and checked that all 4 of my cameras were recording to 2 drives. Because patience and paper beat a loud voice every time, and I had both. My name is Walt Brennan. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I ran boundary surveys, easement work, and subdivision plats across 3 counties in the western part of this state, and I retired with a clean license and a storage room full of field books. A man learns a particular habit of mind doing that work. You learn that the ground does not lie and people do. Not always on purpose, but a man will swear his fence has stood in the same place for 40 years when the pin says it moved 9 feet the day his father got tired and eyeballed it. So you stop trusting the swearing and you trust the monument in the ground and the line on the recorded plat. And after enough years, that habit stops being a job and starts being the way you see the whole world. I retired with that habit intact. It is the most valuable thing I own, and it cost Diane Caldwell everything before she understood I had it. When Karen and I found the 11 acres on the ridge above Coldwater, it was overgrown, and the old fence line had collapsed into the bunch grass, the wire rusted down into the dirt and the posts leaning every direction like bad teeth. We did not care. We could see the Cabinet Mountains from the porch we had not built yet, the snow on them gone blue in the late light, and Karen stood in the long grass with her hand over her eyes against the sun and said, this was the place, just like that. No hedging. We closed in late spring. I remember signing at the title company with her knee bouncing under the table because she wanted to get out there and walk it before dark. Our daughter Nora was born that same year, in the fall, and we brought her home up that gravel road with the heater running. The 3 of us were a unit out there. 11 acres and a gravel road, and the kind of quiet that makes a city person nervous and makes me feel like myself. Karen used to say the silence out there had a sound to it, and she was right. You can hear the wind change direction before it reaches you. I want you to understand what kind of fence we are talking about, because it matters to everything that came after. It was not a privacy fence. It was a 4-strand wire fence on cedar posts. The sort of fence ranchers have run for 100 years, set to mark the western boundary of our land where it met an undeveloped strip the developer had platted but never built on. Karen and I dug every post hole. The summer Nora turned 6. I ran the line off the recorded corners myself, found the original iron pins under 40 years of sod with a probe and a metal detector, pulled the tape, set each post true to the line, and Karen stretched the wire with a come-along and tamped the backfill, while Nora carried staples in a coffee can, and named every grasshopper she caught. It was hot work. We did it in the cool of the mornings and quit by noon when the heat came up off the bunch grass. In waves, Karen got a sunburn across the back of her neck that peeled for a week, and she wore it like a medal. I can still see her leaning on the tamping bar with her gloves off, blowing on a blister, telling me my post holes were crookeder than my politics. It took us most of a June. When it was done, we sat on the tailgate of the truck and drank lemonade out of the same thermos. The three of us, and Karen looked down the clean new line of posts, marching off toward the timber, and said, "Now everybody knows where we end and the rest of the world begins." She said it light, like a joke. She did not know how right she would turn out to be, or that I would be standing on that same line 2 years after she was gone, watching a stranger pull her posts out of the ground. For the first dozen years, there was no homeowners association at all. Then the developer who owned the land below us sold his remaining parcels to a company that wanted to build a gated community of trophy homes, and the company organized the residents into the Pinewood Ridge HOA, and the HOA elected Diane Caldwell president. Her husband, Greg Caldwell, ran the development company. I did not know that last part for a long time. I only knew that a woman I had never met began sending me letters about my property. The first letter came on a Tuesday in the spring. It was printed on cream paper, with a little pine tree logo at the top, and it informed me that my fence was, and I am quoting it the way I have quoted it to myself 100 times since, not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the Pinewood Ridge community. It requested that I remove it within 30 days. I read it twice at the kitchen table. Then I did the thing I have done my whole working life when a piece of paper makes a claim about land. I went to the county and I pulled the records. What the records showed was simple, and I want to walk you through it the way I walked through it at the county counter that morning, because this is the part everybody skips, and it is the part that wins. I pulled my own deed first. Then I pulled the recorded plat of the Pinewood Ridge subdivision and laid it next to mine on the counter, and the young woman at the recorder's office helped me find the declaration of covenants that the HOA was formed under. My 11 acres predated the Pinewood Ridge subdivision by decades. My parcel sat outside the platted boundary of their subdivision entirely, a separate legal description with its own chain of title going back before the developer ever bought the ground below me. My parcel was never annexed into the HOA. The declaration listed every lot bound by it, by number, and my land was not among them, because it could not be, because it was never theirs to include. There was no covenant running with my deed, no recorded declaration binding me to their standards, no easement, nothing. The fence sat on my boundary, on my side, on my land, dead on the surveyed line. The HOA had exactly as much authority over my fence as it had over the weather. I made certified copies of the deed, the plat, the declaration, and the title commitment, paid the $1 a page, and drove home. And I started a manila folder, and on the tab, I wrote the date in block letters. That folder is the reason I can tell you this story. Everything Diane did from that point forward, I dropped into it dated, and the folder got fatter while she got louder, and only one of those two things matters in a county building. I wrote Diane a short letter back. I was polite. I told her my parcel was not part of her association, that I had the recorded documents to show it, and that the fence marked a surveyed boundary and would stay. I thought that would be the end of it. I want to be honest about that. I genuinely believed a reasonable person, shown the records, would say my mistake and move on. I had not yet learned that Diane Caldwell did not read records. She read rooms, and she had decided the room agreed with her. The second letter came 11 days later. It did not address a single fact in mine. It simply repeated the demand and added a fine. $200, it said, for the continuing violation, accruing weekly. I filed it. I did not pay it, because you cannot fine a man for an authority you do not have over him. But I filed it, and I photographed it, and I wrote the date on a legal pad I had started keeping by the phone. 1 letter. I want you to hear those numbers, because they are going to grow. That summer, I started seeing the golf cart. Diane drove a white HOA golf cart with the little pine logo on the side, and she took to rolling slowly up the public access road that ran past the foot of my drive, stopping at my gate, sitting there a while and rolling on. The first few times I figured she was just being a busybody. Then one morning in July, she got out, walked up my gravel to where I was changing the oil in my truck, and stood over me with a clipboard. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "this is going to go a great deal easier for you if you simply comply." I sat back on my heels and looked at her. Her blazer was the color of a road flare, and her shoes were already gray with my dust. "Comply with what?" I asked her. She said, "Community standards." I told her, same as I told the letter, that my land was not in her community. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has gotten his arithmetic wrong and said, "It is functionally part of our jurisdiction, Mr. Brennan, whether your paperwork agrees or not." Then she got back in her cart and rolled away. I went inside and wrote it down. I did not know it yet, but that phrase, functionally part of our jurisdiction, was going to come out of her mouth 3 times before this was over, and the last time would be the one that finished her. I told Nora about it that night on the phone. Nora was 20 by then, away at the State University studying engineering, and she had her mother's flat, practical streak. "Dad," she said, "are you writing all this down?" I told her I was. "Good," she said. "Cameras, too." I had 2 then, one on the gate and one on the porch. By the end of that month, I had 4, 2 of them covering the west fence line, all of them saving to a drive in the house, and a second drive I kept in the gun safe. Nora had taught me how to set them up over a weekend when she came home. The 2 of us running cable along the eaves while she explained backups in the patient voice her mother used to use on me. "Back it up twice," she said, "because a thing that only exists once does not exist." I have thought about that sentence a great deal since. The escalation that fall came in a pattern I now recognize as deliberate. Diane could not make me pay her fines. So she went looking for other levers. The first was a man she introduced as a compliance inspector. He showed up in October in a polo shirt with the Pine logo embroidered on the breast and a laminated badge on a lanyard, driving a sedan with the HOA decal stuck crooked on the door, and he stood at my gate and announced he was there to conduct a property inspection. The frost had not burned off yet, and his dress shoes were soaked through dark from walking across my ditch. I came down from the porch with my coffee and stood on my side of the gate. I asked to see his credentials. He held up the laminated badge with 2 fingers like it was a sheriff's star. I asked what agency had issued it. He said, "The Pinewood Ridge Architectural Compliance Committee." I told him that was not an agency. That was a club, and a club does not get to inspect a man's land any more than my bowling league gets to inspect his. He blinked at me. He said the association had received complaints. I asked him from whom. He said that was confidential. I told him he was standing on a county road, which was public, and that he was welcome to it, but that my gate was the edge of my land, and he would not be coming through it without a court order signed by a judge, and that I would be glad to read any such order very carefully. He took photographs of my fence from the road for 20 minutes, walking up and down the shoulder, holding his phone up over the wire, and the whole time my fence camera held him in frame, and the porch camera held the road. And then he got in his wet shoes and his descaled sedan and left. I have all 20 minutes of him on 2 drives. I filed the date. That was incident 3. By winter, the fines on paper had reached several $1,000s. All of them fictional. None of them paid, every notice photographed and filed. I had a system by then. Each letter went into the folder with the date on it. Each visit went onto the legal pad with the time. Each camera clip got copied to the second drive with a label. I was not building a case yet, not consciously. I was doing what I had done my whole career, which is to write down what is true so that later, when somebody disputes it, the paper is already there. Diane was building something too. She just did not know that everything she built, I was recording. The thing that turned it from a nuisance into a war happened the following spring, and it happened to Nora. Nora came home for the summer to work a survey internship I had helped her line up, and one afternoon, while I was in town, she was out at the west fence with a camera on a tripod, filming the line for a school project on boundary monumentation. Diane pulled up in the golf cart. I have the whole thing because the fence camera caught it. And Nora kept her phone running too. Diane got out and told my 21-year-old daughter that she was trespassing on community land. Nora, who knew exactly where the boundary was, because I raised her on it, told her she was standing on Brennan property and pointed at the survey pin at the corner. Diane stepped over the pin. She walked onto my land, put herself between Nora and the tripod, and said, "I do not know who you think you are, but this family does not get to decide what happens here." Nora kept filming. She kept her voice level, the way I taught her. She said, "You need to get off my dad's property." Diane laughed. That laugh is on 3 of my drives. When I got home and Nora played me the footage, something in me went very quiet. I want to be careful how I describe this because the easy thing would be to tell you I got angry and stormed down to the HOA office. I did not. The quiet I am talking about is the quiet of a man who has just been handed the last piece he needed. Diane had, now, on camera, walked across a surveyed and pinned boundary and laid a verbal claim to my land in front of a witness. Up to that afternoon, I had a paper case about authority. Now I had a documented act of trespass and an explicit claim of ownership over land that was provably mine. I did not say any of that to Nora. I made her a grilled cheese and told her she had done exactly right. And after she went to bed, I sat at the table and copied the clip to a 3rd drive and wrote the date in block letters. I also, the next morning, drove to the county sheriff's office because I had decided it was time the public record had this in it too, not just my folder. The deputy I spoke with was a calm young man named Reyes, maybe 30, who took notes in a steady hand while I talked and did not interrupt me once. He watched the trespass clip twice. Then he set his pen down and told me something I have repeated to every person who has ever asked me for advice since. He said, "Mr. Brennan, I believe you. But belief is not the standard, and I want to be straight with you about how this works so you do not get discouraged. If she files a complaint against you, we have to respond to it whether it has merit or not, because the law does not let us decide in advance who is lying. That is not us taking her side. That is just the machine. What you can do is make the machine work for you. Document every single incident, dates, times, footage. Keep it all in order. And the day the pattern is undeniable, you bring it in here, and it stops being your word against hers, He told me a documented pattern of even a handful of clear incidents would let them act, and a clean one would let the county attorney act. I asked him how many. He thought about it, tapping the pen. Half a dozen solid ones, he said, dated, on video, and nobody upstairs can look away from it. Build me that, and we are not having a he said, she said conversation anymore. I shook his hand and drove home and sat at the table and counted what I already had. The letters, the fine notices, the golf cart visits, the fake inspector, the trespass in front of Nora. I was most of the way to his number before I started, and I had a feeling Diane was not going to stop in time to stay under it. People like her never do. Never do. The quiet ones frighten them, because a quiet man might be weak, or he might be keeping records, and they never think to check which. Somewhere in that same stretch, I learned why Diane cared so much about a wire fence on the edge of nowhere. Dawnra found it actually, doing the kind of records search her old man taught her. She was home for a weekend and got curious the way she does, and she sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled the ownership on the strip of land beyond my west fence, and then she went deeper. "Dad," she said, after about an hour, "come, look at this." The undeveloped strip on the far side of my west fence, the platted land the HOA kept calling community land in every letter, was not community land at all. It was owned outright by a limited liability company, and the LLC traced back to Greg Caldwell, Diane's husband, who ran the development firm that had organized the subdivision in the first place. That was the first piece. The second piece was worse. Nora found that Greg Caldwell had filed preliminary plans with the county planning office to extend the gated community westward, a whole new phase, 24 lots, with a new access road. And that road, drawn right there on the plan sheet, ran straight across the strip and tied into the county road at exactly the point where my fence stood. My fence, and the surveyed boundary it marked, was the one thing standing between Greg Caldwell and an access easement worth a great deal of money. Without that tie-in, the western phase had no legal way in and could not be built. Diane was not enforcing aesthetic standards. She was clearing her husband's road. The pine tree logo was a costume. Underneath it was a survey stake worth 6 figures, and I happened to be sitting on the wrong square inch of it. Nora sat back from the laptop and looked at me. She said, "Dad, this isn't about your fence at all." I told her it never had been. Then I told her to email herself a copy of every page she had just found and back it up twice. And she smiled, because those were her own words coming back at her. That changed how I understood every letter in the folder. The finds were not about my fence being ugly. They were a paper trail meant to manufacture a pretext, so that when the crew finally came, there would be a stack of unanswered violations to wave at anyone who asked. I understood then that Diane intended, eventually, to simply remove the fence and dare me to prove she could not. What she had not counted on was that proving things is the entire profession I retired from. The letters that winter grew teeth. There was a notice of intent to abate the violation. There was a letter from an attorney the HOA had retained, full of language about the association's right to enforce community standards on adjacent parcels. A right that did not exist, written confidently enough that I am sure it frightened other people on that road into compliance over the years. I answered each one the same way, with a short letter restating that my parcel was not bound by their declaration and enclosing a copy of my deed and the recorded plat. And I filed their letter. The fines on paper crossed $10,000 that I never paid and never would. Incident by incident, the staircase climbed. By the time the last spring came, I had 11 months of dated entries. 20-some camera clips, and a folder thick enough to stand on its own edge. Then came the call that started the morning I told you about at the beginning. It was a Thursday evening in late May. My phone rang and it was Diane, which surprised me, because she usually worked through paper. Her voice was bright and final. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "I am calling as a courtesy. The board has authorized removal of the non-compliant fence. We will be on site at 6 tomorrow morning to take it down." I asked her, level as I could, whether she understood that the fence sat on my surveyed property line and that removing it would be destruction of my property and trespass. There was a pause. Then she said it the second time, the phrase, slower now, like she was savoring it. "Mr. Brennan, your property is functionally part of our jurisdiction, and the board has lost its patience." 6 o'clock. I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I will tell you exactly what I felt, because the profile of a calm man can make people think he feels nothing, and that is not true. My heart was going hard, and my jaw was tight enough to ache. Then it passed, the way a gust passes through the lodgepoles, and what was left was that same quiet from the year before. I called Nora. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad!" she said before I could speak what happened, and I told her. She was silent a moment. Then she said, "The cameras." I told her all 4 were up and saving to both drives. She said she was driving home tonight. 3 hours. She did not care. She was not going to miss this. I told her to drive safe and watch for deer on the pass. Then I made coffee. I did not drink. And I went out in the last of the light and checked every camera angle by hand, the 2 on the fence line, the 1 on the gate, the 1 on the porch. And I confirmed each one had a clean view and a blinking light. And I went to bed and slept better than you would think. They came at 6. Exactly, I will give Diane that. She was punctual. I was already up, sitting on the porch in the gray light with the coffee going cold in my hands. Nora beside me, wrapped in one of her mother's old wool blankets, with her phone already out and recording, when the first truck came grinding up the access road. Headlights. Then a second truck came, pulling a flatbed trailer with a small tracked excavator chained down on it. Then Diane's white SUV with the vanity plate, rolling slow over the cattle guard. 4 men got out in canvas work clothes and gloves, blowing on their hands in the cold. Diane got out in a magenta blazer and the kitten heels, breath-fogging, with her clipboard pressed to her chest, and she did not so much as glance toward my porch. She walked the men down to the west fence, my fence, Karen's fence, and she pointed at it with the clipboard the way a general points at a hill, and I heard her voice carry up the slope in the still morning. "All of it," she said. "Posts and wire. The whole run. Loaded out." One of the men looked up toward the house, uncertain, and she said something to him I could not hear, and he looked back down and went to the trailer for the chains. He dropped the ramps and backed the excavator off, and it clanked down onto my dirt and swung its arm toward the first post. I did not go down there. I want you to hear that, because everything in a man wants to run down a hill towards someone tearing out something his dead wife built with her hands, and I felt every inch of that pull. My coffee cup was shaking, not from fear, from the wanting. Nora felt it too. Her hand came over and found my forearm and gripped it, and she said quiet, without looking away from her phone, "Dad, the cameras are the fight." The cameras. She was right. She was 21, and she was right, and she was holding her father in his chair with 5 words. So I stayed. We watched and the 4 cameras watched. 2 on the fence line, catching it close. 1 on the gate, 1 on the porch, holding the whole scene wide. As the excavator hooked its bucket under the first cedar post Karen had tamped into the ground, the June Nora was 6. Roots of concrete and clay swinging off the bottom of it. Then the second, then the third. They worked for 2 hours in the rising light. They pulled 43 posts. They rolled the 4 strands of wire into a screeching tangle and threw it up onto the trailer, and they used the excavator to scrape the line flat where the posts had been. When they were done, there was a raw scar of turned black dirt running the length of the west boundary where the fence had stood for 15 years. And Diane walked that scar end to end with her clipboard, nodding, checking something off, satisfied as a woman touring a finished kitchen. On her way back to the SUV, she finally looked up at the porch and saw the 2 of us sitting there. And instead of flinching, she smiled, and she called up the slope. "You will find the community looks much better already." Then the trucks turned around in my hayfield and drove away down the access road, and the fog had burned off, and the morning was very quiet, and Karen's fence was gone. Nora was shaking, with cold and with anger. The blanket clenched in her fists. I was not. I felt that quiet settle over me, all the way to the bone. Because I had 4 angles of every single second of those 2 hours, saving to 2 drives in the house, one of them already mirrored to a 3rd drive locked in the gun safe the night before. Diane Caldwell had just spent 2 hours and a rented excavator committing a documented crime on camera, in broad daylight, in service of her husband's road, on land she had never once in 2 years bothered to confirm was hers to touch. The fence was gone. The case was finished. She simply did not know it yet, and she would drive home that morning believing she had won. I did not call the sheriff that morning in a rage. I spent the day doing it properly, the way 31 years teaches you to do things. I pulled all 4 camera feeds and built a single clean timeline, every clip labeled with date and time. I added the 11 months of letters, the fines that crossed $10,000, the inspector footage, the trespass clip of Diane stepping over the pin in front of Nora, and now the demolition, 2 hours of it, 43 posts. I made 3 copies of everything. And then I called Deputy Reyes and told him the pattern he'd asked me to build was built, and that the final incident was the destruction of a surveyed boundary fence by the HOA president on video that morning. He was quiet a second, and then he said, "Bring it all in." The reckoning did not happen on a porch or across a fence. It happened in the county building, in a room with fluorescent lights and a long table. At a hearing the county scheduled once Reyes and the county attorneys saw what I brought. Diane was there with the HOA's lawyer, Bede. Greg Caldwell was there too, I think, because by then his road plans were tangled in it and his own attorney had told him to be. There were neighbors from the road in the back, people who had gotten letters of their own over the years, watching. I sat at the table with my folder and a laptop. I did not make a speech. I want to tell you plainly that I said almost nothing, because the whole point of 31 years of records is that you do not have to. The county attorney asked me to walk through it. I did, in order. I laid the recorded plat on the table, and I laid my deed beside it, and I showed where the boundary ran and where the fence had stood. Dead on the line, on my land. I showed the title commitment with no covenant, no annexation, no declaration binding my parcel to anything. Then I played the video. I played Diane stepping over the survey pin onto my land in front of my daughter. I played her saying this family does not get to decide what happens here. And then I played the morning, the excavator, the 43 posts, her voice saying, "Load it out," her clipboard, her smile. You will find the community looks much better already. Then the HOA's lawyer tried the thing they always try. He said the association had a good faith belief that the parcel fell under community jurisdiction. And the county attorney asked Diane, on the record, whether she had ever reviewed the recorded plat or the deed for my parcel before authorizing the removal. And Diane, who had never once in 2 years checked the single fact that the whole thing turned on, who had been told to her face, and in writing more times than I could count, lifted her chin and said it for the 3rd time. She said, "That property is functionally part of our jurisdiction." The room went still. The county attorney let it sit. Then he said, "The recorded plat says otherwise." And the survey was performed by a licensed surveyor. And he turned to me, and he asked for the record, Mr. Brennan, who set the boundary monuments on this line. I have been a licensed land surveyor in this state for 31 years, and I walked that line and set those pins myself, off the recorded corners. You could hear the clock on the wall. There were 2 numbers that ended it, and they sat right next to each other so anyone in that room could feel the gap. In 2 years, the amount of money the HOA had lawfully collected from me was $0. And the surveyed boundary Diane had called functionally, hers had been recorded with the county 41 years before she ever printed a letter. By the original survey, the one my own work matched, pin for pin. $0 of authority on her side, 41 years of record on mine. The lawyer stopped talking. Diane did not say the phrase a 4th time. The consequences fell exactly where her own actions aimed them, which is the part that still makes me shake my head. The county found the HOA had no jurisdiction over my parcel and never had, voided every fine going back to the first cream-colored letter, and entered the destruction of the fence into the record as what it was: willful destruction of property on a surveyed boundary. The sheriff's office filed on the demolition, and the HOA's own insurer ended up paying to make the property loss right, which did not endear Diane to the board that had trusted her. The part that mattered most, though, fell on the road, and it fell with a kind of justice I could not have designed if I tried. Greg Caldwell's westward extension depended on an access easement across the very boundary his wife had just been documented destroying without authority. Once the county had a finding on record that my parcel was independent, that it had never been part of the subdivision, and that my surveyed boundary was correct and recorded, that access route was dead on the table. The road that needed my square inch could not have it. The planning office shelved the western phase. The 24 lots Greg Caldwell had been quietly pre-selling did not get built, and I am told the deposits had to come back. And the development company that had loomed over that whole valley for a decade got a good deal smaller and quieter after that. Diane resigned the presidency before the board could take it from her. She had spent 2 years and her husband's legal budget clearing a path, and the path closed on the strength of her own video, played in a county building by a man she had decided was too quiet to be a problem. She lost the exact thing she had been trying to take, and a fair bit more besides. I never raised my voice. I never set foot on her property. She did all of it to herself, 2 hours of it, 43 posts at a time, while my cameras ran. Nora and I rebuilt the fence that summer. We dug 43 new post holes along the same surveyed line, off the same recorded corners, and I let her run the tape this time and check my pins, and she did it clean, because she is going to be a better surveyor than I ever was. We set the cedar and stretched the wire, and on the last evening we sat on the tailgate the way her mother and I once did. Nora looked down the new line and said, "Now, everybody knows where we end again." I had not told her that her mother said almost those exact words on this same tailgate 15 years before. I did not tell her then either. I just looked at the mountains going pink over the new posts, and let it be enough that the fence stood where it belonged. On the line. On our land. The way Karen and I built it the first time. So here is the lesson. And I am going to say it plainly, because somebody out there is getting a cream-colored letter with a little logo on it this week. Your deed is the truth of your land, not a stranger's confidence. Go to the county and pull your recorded plat and your deed, and read them and walk your boundary against what they say, and find your pins. If somebody claims authority over your property, ask them to show you the recorded document that grants it, in writing, and when they cannot, keep their letter anyway. Write down every contact, the date, and the time. Put up the camera and back the footage up twice, because a thing that only exists once does not exist. You will not need any of it most of the time. The one time you do, though, the folder is already full, and a quiet stack of paper will end an argument that a loud voice never could. If you have got a story like this one, a fence, a gate, a letter, a clipboard at your door, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of people who are right now where I was 2 springs ago. Subscribe if you want to stay for these, because there is always another one. Next time I will tell you about the man down the valley whose HOA tried to take the water rights to a creek that had run through his family's place for 3 generations, and what he found when he pulled the original filing. Until then, keep your records and walk your line.